Okay, let's unpack this. We're opening the vault on a period in American intelligence history that it sounds less like complex espionage and more like some kind of dark, unauthorized science fiction.
It really does. We are diving deep into Project Bluebird, and this wasn't merely a classified research project. The sources reveal it as the Central Intelligence Agency's first formalized, and I'd say panicked, attempt to weaponize human psychology.
And biology, too.
And biology, absolutely. All happening in the early, highly volatile years of the Cold War.
So our mission today, for you, the listener, is to move beyond just the headline and truly understand the mechanism of this ethical collapse.
Yeah.
We need to trace how this overwhelming fear of a Soviet secret, this terror that they could steal our deepest secrets just by dismantling the human mind.
Right.
How that drove the U.S. government down a path of, well, wholesale immorality. We're looking at how this panic led them to adopt, in secret, the very methodologies they had just fought a world war to extinguish.
It's so crucial to set the geopolitical scene here because the core tension driving Bluebird is right there in the sources. The CIA was facing what they perceive as an invisible threat.
An invisible threat.
Exactly. It's the early 1950s. The U.S. feels dominant, right? We have industrial supremacy, atomic supremacy.
No.
But they felt utterly, profoundly vulnerable psychologically.
And that vulnerability wasn't just abstract, was it? It crystallized around a specific, very public, and frankly, profoundly terrifying image that was broadcast globally.
The spectacle of Cardinal Joseph Mindszenty in Hungary.
Right. Why was that incident the trigger? What happened there?
The Mindszenty incident was the absolute geopolitical lightning rod.
Yeah.
So you have this high-ranking Catholic leader. He's arrested and put on a show trial by the communist regime in Hungary.
Okay.
The expectation in the West, of course, was that he would be defiant, resistant, a martyr for the cause.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. Instead, his confession, delivered in court, was utterly bizarre. I mean, witnesses and news reports described his behavior as just unnatural. His body movements were slow, his focus was off, and they used these really chilling phrases like glazed eyes and robotic confessions.
So Western observers weren't just seeing a coerced political confession, which was bad enough. They believed they were seeing something truly foreign, a systematic, almost scientific destruction of a man's will.
Precisely. To the West, this spectacle didn't suggest mere sleep deprivation or, threats to his family. It suggested the Soviets had achieved brainwashing. This was a new, terrifying capability, a way to reconstruct the human will, the personality itself that the U.S. did not possess.
So in intelligence terms, this became the brainwashing gap.
The brainwashing gap, exactly. And the panic was instantaneous and just overwhelming.
It's that fear that seems to justify the scale of the reaction then.
It is. We see the CIA's response, authorized in April 1950 by the then-director Roscoe Hillenkoetter, creating Project Bluebird. And initially, the sources are crystal clear that its primary mandate was defensive.
The ultimate defensive posture being the creation of a secure agent. And the language they use for this ideal is so telling. They called it psychic files.
That's the perfect term for the defensive ideal they were chasing. Engineered amnesia. The goal was to condition an agent's mind to store state secrets in these compartmentalized psychic files, making the information inaccessible even to the agent's own conscious awareness.
So if the agent was captured and tortured, they couldn't betray the secret because they genuinely had no conscious knowledge of it?
They literally couldn't give up what they didn't know they had. It's the ultimate defense. But the sources reveal this fundamental paradox right at the heart of it.
Which is?
To learn how to reliably lock a mind and hide a secret, you first have to master all the techniques required to break it completely.
And that immediate operational pivot led the CIA down a very, very dark road.
It did. The shocking revelation we have to confront is that achieving this defense required an immediate descent into offensive experimentation, which necessitated a clandestine marriage with the remnants of the Third Reich's medical establishment through Operation Paperclip.
And we have to be clear here. This isn't just about bringing over rocket scientists to build a space program. This is about actively importing the very doctors who had pioneered torture, drug experimentation, and human violation in the concentration camps.
Their existing knowledge on the physical effects of extreme trauma, the impact of hallucinogens like mescaline on ego function, biological incapacitants, all of that became the immediate foundational data for Project Bluebird. It's a complete ethical collapse, disguised and justified as a national security imperative.
So I think our guiding question for this deep dive has to be, How did the crushing pressure of national survival in the Cold War allow medical ethics to be completely distorted, turning the human mind itself into the ultimate disposable battleground?
A great question. And I think we need to start by looking at how that dark inheritance was integrated into American intelligence.
Let's do it.
To really understand the ethical vacuum that Bluebird immediately inhabited, we have to start with Operation Paperclip. I mean, the public narrative, as you said, centers on Wernher von Braun and the V-2 rocket.
The heroes of the space race.
Right. But the CIA's immediate interest lay in what we might call the operation's sinister biological wing.
And this was a massive undertaking. We're talking about relocating over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to the U.S. after World War II. What was the mechanism they used to justify bringing over personnel who were, known to have committed atrocities?
The mechanism was the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or JIOA. Now, this agency was tasked with vetting the scientists, but they were operating under a very explicit priority of strategic acquisition. The sources detail what they termed the utilitarian calculus of justice.
Tell us more about that specific calculus. It sounds like the moment the rule of law was willingly suspended.
It was a suspension based purely on perceived strategic necessity. The JIOA decided that the immense value of a scientist's specialized knowledge, specifically their expertise on Soviet intelligence capabilities, high-speed aviation, or most critically for us, biological warfare.
That knowledge outweighed their crimes.
It outweighed their culpability in war crimes, yes, including being active members of the Nazi Party or having personally overseen lethal human experiments.
So the argument wasn't that these doctors were innocent. The argument was that their knowledge was a more valuable asset to national security than the pursuit of justice was to, well, global morality.
Exactly. And this isn't just ignoring crimes, it's a profound cultural transference. The Nazi medical establishment operated under a doctrine of state biology, where the individual was viewed as a disposable, expendable resource, just a cell in the state's organism.
A means to an end.
A means to an end. And when Paperclip brought these individuals into the U.S. national security framework, they imported that ethos wholesale.
And that ethos merged perfectly with the rising Cold War mindset, which viewed the struggle against communism as a kind of total war, where civilian ethics were optional.
The merger was seamless. The CIA quickly adopted the view that the methods developed by the Nazis, these methods of total control over the human subject, were simply necessary, cutting-edge techniques for a survival struggle. The German doctors provided the technical data and, just as importantly, the essential moral justification that a higher purpose nullifies individual rights.
Let's ground this in some specific cases, starting with Dr. Walter Schreiber. His position alone suggests a deep entanglement with the atrocities.
Dr. Schreiber was the Surgeon General of the Wehrmacht. He was in command during the years when these horrific, lethal medical experiments were conducted. We're talking about administering gangrene and typhus to prisoners, freezing experiments to test survival rates in cold water.
The kind of things you read about and can't quite believe are real.
Exactly. And chemical weapons testing at places like Dachau and Auschwitz.
And he was named by several witnesses at the Nuremberg doctors' trial as being complicit, yet he walked free and straight into U.S. employment.
He was brought to the U.S. in 1951, entirely bypassing the Nuremberg process. Initially, he was employed by the U.S. Air Force School of Aviation Medicine in Texas. But his relevance to Bluebird, as the sources clearly show, is much more direct and immediate.
You point out his early consulting work in Germany at a site we absolutely need to discuss. Camp King.
Yes. So before his official U.S. posting, Schreiber served as a critical consultant on the use of drugs for interrogation at Camp King. His expertise in the documented effects of various chemical and biological agents on the human body data harvested directly from concentration camp prisoners was considered pure gold.
By giving him an official, though clandestine role, the U.S. apparatus effectually legitimized these unconventional interventions pioneered in death camps. They turned them into acceptable intelligence protocols.
It gives a clinical veneer to what was fundamentally sadism.
Now let's turn to Dr. Kurt Blum, who seems even more connected to biological weaponry.
Blum was the Deputy Surgeon General of the Reich and the undisputed head of the Nazi biological warfare program. During the doctor's trial, he admitted, under oath, to having experimented with plague vaccines on concentration camp prisoners.
He admitted it. And despite that admission, he was acquitted. That just strains credibility immediately.
It does. Historians now largely agree that his acquittal was secured through covert U.S. intervention. Specifically, the Americans stepped in to make sure he was saved for future employment because his unique knowledge was just too valuable to let go.
And after his acquittal in 1947,
He was immediately hired by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps.
so what was Bloom's specific value proposition for the Bluebird team? Was it purely about truth serums?
Oh, it was much broader and more offensive than that. While truth serums are part of it, Bloom's expertise was crucial in developing biological incapacitants. The CIA wasn't just looking for drugs that made people talk. They wanted agents that could rapidly induce severe illness, high fever, disorientation, or temporary paralysis.
Anything that could instantly render a resistant subject vulnerable to interrogation.
Anything. Bloom's knowledge of infectious agents and toxins directly fed into the Bluebird and later Artichoke mandate of achieving total control over the human organism using non-traditional means. This later directly influenced a subsidiary project known as MKUltra.
So this continuous thread of imported pathology brings us back to the place where these concepts were actively field-tested, outside the U.S. legal system.
To Camp King in Oberursel, Germany.
Tell us about this place.
Camp King is the operational nexus. It's the geographical and moral missing link. It was originally a Luftwaffe interrogation center. After the war, the CIA and the U.S. Army took it over to process, detain, and interrogate high-value defectors, refugees, and suspected double agents from the Soviet bloc.
And the sources emphasized that its location was key. Why there?
Because it was situated on occupied soil, Camp King operated completely outside U.S. domestic legal constraints. It became the prototype for what we now understand as a black site, a laboratory of no legal consequences, where operational experiments could be conducted on subjects the CIA euphemistically deemed aliens, or chillingly expendable.
So what were the specific activities conducted there under the umbrella of Bluebird and its successor, Artichoke?
They systematically tested the very techniques they had acquired from the Nazi physicians and their research. This included the use of powerful hallucinogens like LSD and mescaline, administered to unsuspecting prisoners specifically to shatter their ego defenses and induce confusion.
So they weren't just questioning them.
No. They practiced rough interrogation, which was the combination of intense physical and psychological pressure with these newly acquired drugs to force confessions.
And this is where the Dachau data comes right back into play.
Absolutely. The data collected at Dachau by people like Dr. Krut-Klettner on the psychological effects of mescaline was not discarded. It was seamlessly integrated into CIA interrogation protocols at Camp King. The dark inheritance wasn't just institutionalized, it was operationalized, and that paved the way for the formalized program back home.
So with this imported pathology forming the technical basis, let's now look at how the CIA formalized this desperation. Project Bluebird, authorized in April 1950, it seems like it attempted to bring some kind of structure to this chaotic, ethically bankrupt process.
Yes, and we need to look closely at the official objectives approved by Director Hillenkoetter because they really outline the three competing needs of the early Cold War CIA.
Okay, so first, there's the defensive goal, conditioning personnel. That means discovering means to condition U.S. personnel to prevent unauthorized extraction of information by any known means, basically interrogation resistance.
Exactly. Then second, you have the more aggressive goal, control via interrogation, which was investigating the possibility of controlling an individual through special techniques. This is where the operational focus on mind manipulation really came in.
And third, the pragmatic intelligence goal, memory enhancement. This was about improving an agent's recall for complex operational details, codes or maps, without needing written records, which were obviously dangerous if discovered.
But the sources reveal this fundamental internal contradiction from the very outset that really determined the project's fate. It was a bureaucratic schism.
A power struggle within the agency.
A huge one. This internal fight was decisive. On one side, you had the Office of Scientific Intelligence, the OSI. They approached Bluebird as academic research. They wanted to study foreign literature, fund university research. They wanted it to be clinical, controlled, and defensible as science.
But on the other side were the practical intelligence guys, the Inspection and Security Office, INSO, the people who were actually running agents and defectors, and they demanded immediate operational results.
The INSO argued that laboratory research was, well, insufficient and irrelevant. They believed the only way to validate these techniques, especially the extreme ones, was to test them immediately on real subjects in actual interrogation settings.
And they won.
They won. This tension was resolved by 1952 when the operational faction took over. Control shifted from the OSI to the Office of Security, and that marked the complete pivot from academic inquiry to aggressive human experimentation, which led to the new name, Project Artichoke.
Okay, so let's focus on the holy grail that they pursued with such intensity, the reliable induction of amnesia. If they could interrogate a subject and then completely erase the memory of the session, they would have achieved the perfect, undetectable intelligence coup.
They called the target psychological state the twilight state. And this was not just sedation. It was a condition achieved through narcohypnosis, where the subject was still conscious enough to speak, but their conscious mind, their executive function, their moral resistance was completely bypassed.
Walk us through that specific drug cocktail protocol. It sounds less like medicine and more like chemical warfare against the brain's defenses.
That's a very apt description. It was a precise, forced chemical roller coaster. So step one was the induction. They used barbiturates intravenously, most commonly sodium amytal or sodium pentothal.
And these are fast-acting.
Very fast-acting. They're fat-soluble drugs, which means they enter the brain very quickly. The goal was rapid sedation, relaxing the conscious mind, and bypassing what they called the superego, or the moral and loyalty filter.
And just as the subject is sinking into that sedation, they reverse the process dramatically.
Step two, stimulation. They would administer a powerful stimulant, often benzodrine, which is an amphetamine, or sometimes just massive doses of caffeine. This was designed to jolt the subject out of the sedative slump, creating a euphoric, hypercommunicative state they termed a jag.
So the subject is chemically compelled to speak, but their capacity for complex thought or sustained resistance is severely diminished by that initial sedative.
Precisely. The interrogation and the hypnotic commands all happen in this highly vulnerable, chemically induced state. Then comes the final, crucial step, amnesia induction. The entire session would conclude with the interrogator giving a strong, direct suggestion that the subject would remember absolutely nothing of the event.
No faces, no rooms, no questions.
Nothing. And this command was often reinforced by a final, deeper sedative to ensure the subject fell into a deep, memoryless sleep.
That detailed procedure really underscores the clinical, mechanical nature of the violation. But the sources show that even barbiturates and amphetamines were deemed insufficient. They wanted agents that could fundamentally shatter the mind to see what fell out. And that brings us right back to the Nazi data.
It's the imported pathology at its most influential. The Bluebird researchers directly adopted the methodology and, in some cases, the actual data from Nazi experiments. Their focus was on substances that destroyed ego defenses.
Such as mescaline.
Yes. Mescaline was adopted directly from the work conducted at Dachau by researchers like Dr. Kurt Plittner. The CIA used it specifically to shatter cognitive integrity, induce deep confusion, and create emotional and psychological pain.
And then LSD-25, lysergic acid diethylamide, became the potent successor.
LSD was viewed as the chemical evolution of this strategy. They tested it systematically to induce schizophrenia-like confusion, profound dissociation, or even permanent, irreversible amnesia. The rationale wasn't just to learn secrets, it was to dissolve the cognitive structure required to maintain a lie or a cover story. The bad trip was not a side effect.
It was the tool.
It was the tool itself. It was a traumatic event intended to obscure the memory of the preceding interrogation.
And this rapid development from theory to operational use yielded what they considered an undeniable success, which was detailed in a memo from 1952.
Yes, this memo was instrumental in boosting the Artichoke faction. It described the interrogation of two individuals suspected of being Soviet agents. The team used light dosages of drugs coupled with hypnosis to rapidly induce a complete hypnotic trance. And this trance state was maintained for nearly 2 hours while the subjects were interrogated.
And the desired outcome, the amnesia.
Following the session, they achieved a subsequent total amnesia produced. The subjects woke up with absolutely no memory of that 2-hour interrogation period. To the Office of Security, this was proof positive. The technical capability to extract information and then wipe the evidence existed. That validation spurred massive investment into psychochemical agents and the subsequent, much larger MKUltra project.
It truly is reality manipulation, not just interrogation. They were demonstrating they could write and erase chapters of a person's life without their awareness.
And this clinical erasure of experience leads us to the most ambitious, almost metaphysical goal of Bluebird, the architectural redesign of the human psyche itself. So, if the drug cocktails were the brute force hammer used to temporarily break the mind, the CIA believed that hypnosis was the theoretical scalpel that could precisely restructure it. And this takes us to the truly chilling goal of compartmentalization.
This concept was championed by a man named Morse Allen, who was key to Bluebird. He wasn't some renowned psychological researcher, was he?
Not at all, and that's what's so telling. Allen was a security officer and crucially, an amateur hypnotist. His influence highlights the dangerously unscientific nature of the whole program. He drove the theory of psychic files, positing that the human mind was not a unitary entity but could be structurally divided, thereby making a loyal agent impervious to conventional torture.
Okay, explain the steps Ellen theorized for building this psychic file. How do you hide a secret in a compartment the agent doesn't even know exists?
It required intense, ritualized manipulation. So, step 1. Deep hypnotic induction to bypass the conscious self. Step 2. Imprinting of the secret information codes, names, targets directly into the subconscious. And then step 3, the locking mechanism. The memory was secured with a potent post-hypnotic command tied to a specific trigger word or signal.
So the agent, if captured, could then undergo the most brutal physical torture and still not be able to betray the secret because the conscious self literally did not hold the memory.
That was the defensive ideal, yes. They were creating an agent that was truthfully resistant because they were telling the truth as they knew it.
And what about getting the information back out?
That was the final operational step, retrieval, and it was equally critical. The designated handler would use the unique trigger word to unlock the compartment, retrieve the message, and then immediately reseal the memory before the agent's conscious self could process what had just happened.
Allen's own notes describe this process in highly personalized, almost fictional terms. He details the creation of an alter personality.
Yes, his documentation describes the meticulous process of building an entirely separate identity. He would sometimes start with a benign childhood memory, an imaginary childhood playmate, for instance, and then transform that idea into a functional separate identity. He called the surface personality Jones A and the secret, deeper, loyal American personality Jones B.
And Jones B knew everything Jones A did, but not the other way around.
Precisely. Jones A had no conscious access to the secret contents of Jones B.
The ultimate ambition isn't just controlling a subject's current confession, it's controlling the subject's entire sense of reality and identity for operational use.
Where did they test the technical feasibility of this psychic architecture?
The primary testing ground was the secretarial trials, which were documented extensively in memos from 1951 and 1953, labeled SI and H experimentation. That's sleep induction and hypnosis.
And the subjects.
The subjects were CIA secretaries, clerks, and support staff, often volunteers who had absolutely no idea the experiments were leading toward deep psychological restructuring. And the finding from September 1951 is truly what validated the terrifying concept of the Manchurian candidate.
That memo reports a startling series of experiments that demonstrated that remote control was technically possible. Allen successfully induced 2 female subjects into a deep, controlled hypnotic state. And the key finding was that the subjects could pass from a fully awake state to a deep H-controlled state via the telephone, via some very subtle signal that cannot be detected by other persons in the room.
Let's just dwell on that detail for a moment. They weren't using a secret password shouted in a room. They were using subtle, undetectable signals, a slight cough, a certain inflection in the voice, a frequency on the phone line to activate this hidden compartment.
It confirmed to the Bluebird team that a fully programmed, triggered response, potentially including the commission of a crime or even an assassination, could be initiated remotely and stealthily. The ethical breach here is just breathtaking. They were moving from simple interrogation to the creation of unwitting, remote-controlled assets.
And this theory of psychic files, compartmentalization, and the creation of the alter. It finds a disturbing parallel in the later account of a civilian victim, Candy Jones.
Yes, Candy Jones was a famous model and beauty queen. Years later, under therapeutic hypnosis, she recovered these detailed memories that aligned perfectly with the documented CIA protocol. She claimed she was recruited by a handler and subjected to experiments designed to fragment her personality.
And this led to the creation of her alter, which she called Arlene Grant.
Arlene Grant was the functional, operational personality. Unlike the gentle, glamorous Candy Jones, Arlene was designed to be tough, aggressive, and capable of performing courier missions internationally.
And Jones described the classic sign of deep compartmentalization. She would lose time.
Exactly. She would wake up in unfamiliar places like airports or hotels, having absolutely no memory of the missions Arlene had completed.
That perfectly illustrates the locking and resealing protocol. The conscious self, Candy, was kept intentionally unaware of the secret agent, Arlene.
It's the theory in horrific practice. Now, while the CIA has never officially confirmed her case, the convergence of her recovered memories, the use of drugs, the intentional dissociation, the creation of this tough alter, with the highly specific internal CIA documentation about creating a Jones bee, speaks volumes about how far this deeply unethical research progressed, moving outside the closed walls of Camp King and onto American soil. The transition from Bluebird to Artichoke, it really formalized the program's embrace of offensive violation. When the project was renamed in August 1951, it signaled a definitive pivot.
And that pivot wasn't merely symbolic, it was bureaucratic. Oversight moved away from the research-focused OSI and squarely into the Office of Security, the people who handled agents, defectors, and immediate operational needs.
And this dramatically expanded the project's operational reach. The scope brought in intelligence divisions from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and even the FBI. This allowed the CIA to create these mobile artichoke teams that were deployed worldwide.
And their new standard operating procedure.
It was to use unconventional techniques. The drug cocktails, the aggressive hypnosis, the psychological pressure whenever standard interrogation methods failed.
And this is where the sources confirmed that the ethical bar didn't just drop, it completely dissolved. The protection of the state became the sole metric of morality.
This is the very definition of ethical inversion. If national security is the only moral currency you have, then any act, no matter how cruel or violating, is justified. And that terrifying logic culminates in one of the most redacted and chilling documents of the era, the January 22, 1954 report.
The assassination question. It eliminates any lingering pretense that this was strictly about defensive countermeasures.
Completely. The question posed in this heavily redacted report was stark and direct. Can an individual of redacted descent be made to perform an act of attempted assassination involuntarily under the influence of artichoke?
They were actively theorizing, in writing, about creating a sleeper agent, a programmed assassin who could kill a target and then have no conscious memory of the act.
The authors did conclude that creating a perfectly compliant, robot-like killer was exceptionally difficult, bordering on science fiction. But, and this is the key part, they found that creating a person manipulated through the combination of drugs, deep hypnosis, and the exploitation of that second personality,
That Jones be altered.
that was a viable operational goal.
That distinction is terrifying. It means they weren't looking for a remote control car. They were looking for a puppet whose strings were attached directly to their sense of self. This document confirms the total ethical inversion. The goal shifted from protecting the American mind to fundamentally violating the human mind to make it a lethal weapon for the state.
And this methodology was so aggressive, so devoid of moral restraint, that it eventually consumed its own participants. The tragedy of Dr. Frank Olson is the perfect illustration of this system turning on itself.
Right. Olson was a U.S. Army biochemist stationed at Fort Detrick, which was the heart of the U.S. biological warfare program. He was deep in the artichoke discussions, working closely with the infamous Sidney Gottlieb.
Olson traveled to Europe, and the sources suggest that that experience triggered a profound moral crisis in him. He allegedly witnessed terminal interrogation sessions where expendable subjects, likely foreign nationals or defectors at places like Camp King, were experimented upon with biological or psychochemical agents he helped develop.
And then they were tortured to death or executed.
Exactly.
So he knew too much and was experiencing crippling moral distress. He became instantly a profound security risk to the agency.
And the CIA moved quickly. In November 1953, Sidney Gottlieb covertly dosed Olson with LSD during a weekend retreat in Maryland. The drug triggered a severe psychotic break and paranoia. Days later, Olson was dead, falling from the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel in New York City.
The initial ruling was suicide. But later investigations, particularly those examining forensic evidence related to his fall, strongly suggested that Olson was murdered. He was silenced to prevent him from exposing the full artichoke network, particularly the human experimentation and the dark connections to the Nazi paperclip doctors.
Olson's fate provides the most horrific internal conclusion to the artichoke mentality. When one of their own scientists developed a conscience, the system treated him with the same disposable, dehumanizing methodology it reserved for the foreign, expendable subject. The compartmentalization they sought to impose on their agents became the ultimate self-protecting mechanism of their own security apparatus.
So the programs run, the bodies pile up, and the threat of exposure grows. Project Bluebird, Artichoke, and the subsequently larger MKUltra project were all built on the same ethically rotten foundation.
And then in 1973, with the winds of congressional inquiry beginning to blow, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the institutional erasure. He issued a directive for the destruction of all files, operational logs, personnel files, research results related to MKUltra, Bluebird, and Artichoke.
This was a deliberate attempt to ensure that the full, unvarnished history of the programs and the crimes committed would never be known, never be subject to justice. So how do we know about it now?
Helms's act of erasure failed due to simple bureaucratic incompetence. In 1977, a cache of financial records, hundreds of boxes of invoices and accounting ledgers, was miraculously discovered.
They missed some boxes.
They missed the money. These weren't the operational logs, so they hadn't been targeted for destruction. And they provided a financial roadmap, detailing where money was spent, the names of researchers who were paid, the funding of various front organizations, and critically, the purchase orders for thousands of doses of LSD and other psychochemical agents.
That financial trail forced the truth to surface and led directly to the official condemnation. The Senate Select Committee, better known as the Church Committee, which delivered its findings in 1975-1976.
Yes, the committee exposed massive, systematic, illegal human experimentation on unwitting citizens, including soldiers, patients, and doctors. Their condemnations centered on what they called the distorted ethics of the agency. They concluded that the desperate pursuit of security had led the CIA to systematically violate the very fundamental human values and laws it was sworn to protect.
But the most damning moral evaluation requires us to return to the source of the dark inheritance, the Nazi continuity. This entire program was developed and executed after the establishment of the Nuremberg Code.
The genealogical link between the programs is undeniable. The use of data harvested from Dachau experiments, the employment of certified war criminals like Schreiber and Bloom, and the core philosophy of treating the individual as disposable, it's a clear and direct transference of Nazi medical ethics into the Cold War CIA.
And the Nuremberg Code, established specifically to prevent a recurrence of Nazi medical atrocities, was just systematically ignored.
It was bypassed by a deliberate ethical dodge. The CIA's internal justification was that national security created a state of exception where the code simply did not apply. By making that decision, they willingly operated under the same moral framework as the regime they had just defeated.
Let's look at the specific documented violations of the code inherent in Bluebird's operation. The code demands voluntary consent.
That was routinely and completely ignored. Bluebird used unwitting subjects, prisoners, defectors, military personnel, and civilians like Candy Jones, who had zero ability to understand, consent to, or even remember the procedures they underwent. The idea of informed consent was antithetical to the entire project design.
The second violation is the avoidance of harm. The code explicitly demands that experiments avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering.
And Bluebird intentionally inflicted suffering. The creation of psychosis, severe trauma, forced addiction, and profound mental instability was not a failure of the program. It was often the intended result. They viewed the mental and physical suffering as a necessary step to break the subject and achieve ultimate control.
And finally, the right to withdraw.
It's non-existent. Subjects who were prisoners under military discipline or victims of covert drugging had no freedom whatsoever to bring the experiment to an end, a right which is fundamental to ethical human testing. The CIA's only defense was this vague, overriding imperative of national security, despite the fact that the programs often failed to deliver their technical goals while leaving immense human wreckage behind.
It's clear that the compartmentalization the CIA sought to create in their agents, Jones A and Jones B, was mirrored by the compartmentalization of their own morality, building a psychic wall that separated their operational actions from their conscience.
They adopted the logic of their perceived enemy in the name of defense, and in doing so, they demonstrated that the totalitarian mindset is ultimately portable.
Project Bluebird stands as a monumental testament to the corrosive power of fear. In their absolute terror of a Soviet mind control weapon, a weapon the sources strongly suggest never achieved the kind of scale or reliability the CIA feared, the agency completely contaminated itself.
By importing the doctors and adopting the ethics of the Third Reich, they infused the American intelligence community with a totalitarian virus, the chilling belief that the state could secretly own, engineer, and dismantle the mind of its subjects for perceived security gains.
And that initial defensive goal, the creation of those perfectly engineered psychic files, the absolute reversible amnesia, it was never perfected, was it? Despite the decades of subsequent research.
No. The human mind proved resilient and far messier than the simple mechanical engineering Morse Allen dreamed of. Bluebird failed in its technical ambition.
But the real legacy is the trail of shattered lives it left behind.
From the expendable refugees at Camp King, subjected to drug cocktails and torture, to the unwitting U.S. citizens, soldiers, and scientists like Dr. Frank Olson. Project Bluebird did not create a secure defense for democracy. It created a profound internal moral catastrophe that we are still reckoning with today.
So what does this terrifying chapter tell us about the nature of power and paranoia? The source notes that the ethical compartmentalization the CIA enacted allowed them to separate their actions from their conscience.
And this raises an important and lasting question for you, the learner, to consider. When does the fear of an external threat become the absolute justification for internal totalitarianism, and what are the signs? And ultimately, how resilient is the fundamental human psyche against the pressure of absolute state power attempting to rewrite the fundamental rules of memory and identity? It's a question that demands continuous vigilance.